Right. There we go. Recording in progress. Okay, welcome back. Today we have, in my opinion, a very interesting class. We're going to study 3 verses from the story of the Garden of Eden, and we're going to apply everything we studied this semester so far to understand these verses. Okay? This is based on an article I wrote about 15 years ago. However, the Torah hasn't changed so much in the past 15 years, hasn't changed so much in the past few thousand years, so it's still relevant. And I hope we'll finish today. If we don't finish today, maybe next week. All right, so let's get into it. It's the tree of knowledge and the tree of life. We're going to try to understand it now according to what we've learned in Maimonides. So it says, V'yomer Adonai Elohim. And God said, Hen ha'adam haya ke'ahad mimenu. Right? Behold, man has become one like us. We've actually seen a different way of interpreting this verse earlier in the semester. Ladat tov vara. How is man unique? Is that he can know for himself, right? Differentiate between right and wrong, good and evil. Ve'ata, and so now, therefore, pen yishlach yado, right? We're worried that maybe he will send forth his hand, ve'lakach gam me'etz ha'chaim, and he shall also take from the tree of life, ve'achal v'chai ne'olam, right? And he shall eat and live forever. V'yishalechu Adonai Elohim migan Eden, and God banished them, or banished him from the Garden of Eden. La'avod et ha'adama asher nukach misham, right? To work the ground, the earth which he was taken from. V'ygarish et ha'adam, and man was banished. Vayashken mikedem legan Eden et keruvim, right? And before, right before the entrance, or it could be mikedem, could be before, it could be to the east of the Garden of Eden, he placed the keruvim, ve'et, and also lahat hacherev hamitapechet, and also the flaming sword, or the flaming transforming sword. Nishmor et derech etz hachaim. Right? This is in order to preserve or guard the way to the tree of life. This is right. This is, everyone's familiar with these passages. This is after man and Eve, Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge. Right? This was the consequence. They were banished from the Garden of Eden, and God placed he placed special guards at the entrance, right, to guard the way to the tree of life. First of all, we've never seen that God forbade eating from the tree of life. Right? What's the danger? God gave Adam one mitzvah. He said, don't eat from the tree of knowledge. Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge. And now God is banishing them from the Garden of Eden. And he's placing guards to guard the way to the tree of life. Not the tree of knowledge, the tree of life. But pay attention, he still didn't forbid them from eating from the tree of life. He just put guards in front. He still didn't command Adam not to eat from the tree of life. All right, so What's going on? What actually happened when Adam ate from the tree of knowledge? All right. So, in the beginning of his book, Guide for the Perplexed, this is the first two chapters. He deals with the concept of the image of God, and someone he says a scholarly person comes and he gave him this very difficult question, or at least the scholar thought it was a difficult question. He says, מפשוטו של מקרא נראה שהכוונה הראשונה הייתה שאדם יהיה כשאר בעלי החיים. He says, it seems when you first read the story of the creation of man and the Garden of Eden, it seems that man was intended to be like all other living creatures, all the animals. Beri sechem, right? Without any intelligence, without intellect. Uvni mahshava, right? Without the ability to think. Velo yevchin ben tov lara. And he has no ability to differentiate between right and wrong. Right? Because how do we know this? Well, only after he ate from the tree of knowledge, which he was forbidden to do so, did he acquire this this special degree. וכאשר המרה את פי האל, and only once he went against, right, he violated God's command, גרם לו מריו, right, his defiance caused him בהכרח את השלמות הגדולה ביותר לאדם. His defiance, going against God's command, is what gave him this extremely great degree, where now he has an intellect and he's able to differentiate between right and wrong. Right? He has this intellectual understanding and differentiation that we have now. ההבחנה הזאת היא הנכבדה מכל התכונות המסויות לנו, ובעבורה אנו אסמים. He says, this degree, this ability, this understanding that we have, that's the greatest virtue of man. ומפליא הוא שעונשו על מיליו, right? And what you can't understand, what's impossible to understand, is that his punishment for going against God's command is that he was elevated to a higher level, that now he has an intellect. אין זה אלא כדברי האומר שאיש מן האנשים המרה והפליג בפשעו ואז שינו סורתו ועשהו כוכב בשמיים. Right? This would be the same as a person being a very terrible criminal, and he keeps increasing in his crime and doing more and more evil, and as a punishment he becomes a big Hollywood superstar, and everybody loves him, and he turns into a star in the sky, shining on everyone else. So what kind of a punishment is this? So does anybody have an answer to this scholar? This question seems fair, right? God made man, told him, don't eat from the tree of knowledge. He ate from the tree of knowledge, and now all of a sudden he can differentiate between right and wrong. Question is, how could he differentiate between right and wrong before he ate from the tree of knowledge, to know not to eat from the tree of knowledge, that it's wrong to defy God's command? So Maimonides answers him. He says, "Hare en hadavar kmo shechashavta b'ra'ayon shesatz rishona." Right? From a superficial reading, it's not as you understood when you first start reading this book, אלא כמו שהתברר כאשר תתבונן בדברים האלה. But only once you study, right, in depth this book, you will understand, right, that your question has no standing. כי השכל, right, this intellect that man has, שאותו השפיע אלוהים על האדם, which God bestowed to man. We're going back to this word hishpia, shefa, this overflow of knowledge and wisdom and goodness that comes from God, that he passed on to man. Hi shlemuto harona. This is man's ultimate perfection. Hu asher haya la'adam kodem mirio. This is the state man was in before defying God's command. This is the ultimate state of man, which man was created in. And thanks to this level, he was able to receive mitzvot, or a mitzvah, a command. And because of this intellect, we'll leave it at that for now, God said that man was created in the image of God. This is before man's sin. Right? And due to this intellect, this level of man, God was able to address man, speak to him. In other words, to prophesize man. And give him a command. V'siva כמו שאמר, as it says, ויסב אדוני אלוהים, right? It says that God commanded man, ואין ציווי לבהמות, ולא למי שאין לו שכל. And there is no command, there is no order that you can give an animal or he who has no intellect. בשכל הוא מבחין בין אמת ושקר. And in man's intellect, he can differentiate between true and false. וזה השכל היה מסוי בו שלם וגמור. And this intellect was perfect with man, in man's creation. So what happened once he ate? We said, well, we're not talking about differentiating between true and false. When man ate from the tree of knowledge, his intellect shifted to differentiating not between true and false, what's real and what's not, but between right and wrong. It's two completely separate things. However, right and wrong, things that are nice, good behavior, bad behavior, it's more like social norms, what's generally accepted among people and what's less accepted among people. These aren't of the muskalot, because lo mina muskalot, these aren't intellectual categories, but they're more norms, social norms, agreed upon categories. We all agree that a certain behavior is right and a certain behavior is wrong. הרי אין אומרים שמיים כדוריים יפה והארץ שטוחה מגונה. Right? We don't say, right, that around the earth or a globe, a round globe earth, that's nice, and a flat earth is that's wrong. That's bad. No, we say it's true or false. By the way, pay attention. This was written 900 years ago, talking about a round earth as opposed to a flat one. When in Europe 500 years ago, it was illegal to think that the earth was round. All right? Right? We don't say flat earth bad. We say false. We say true and false. Right? However, when he defied God's command, ונטה לעבר תאוותיו הדמיוניות, right? And he veered away from his intellect towards his cravings, his imagination, his ותענוגות חושיו וגופניים, and his physical cravings and wants, כפי שאמר, as it says, כי טוב העץ למאכל, says, wow, this is a beautiful tree to eat from, וכי תאווה הוא לעיניים, right? And it arouses me, you know, through the sight of these fruits. They arouse my hunger. נענש בכך שנשללה ממנו אותה השגה שכלית. So his punishment was that this intellect that he had beforehand was taken away from him. And he went down in an intellectual level. And previously, he had great understanding of the world as God created it, as God leads it. Right? And God said, you know, don't eat. First of all, he spoke to man. Man was a prophet. Man received a command from God, said, don't eat from the tree of knowledge. But man couldn't help himself. He was overcome by his cravings, his imagination. And he defied God's word. So, beforehand, he was perfect. And we saw this also in the book of the Kuzari by Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. He says, Ki Adam haya shalem mibilti tanai. When man was created, he was perfect in every way. And his nefesh was perfect. And his intellect al tachnit ma shebayacholet enushi. And his intellect was at the utmost perfection of that man's intellect could be. Right? And the divine force, what we call the image of God, which is the level beyond human intellect, right? He also had that. It is sonolomar, right? What I want to say, hama'ala, this level, asher ba'id bak ba'ilahim u'baruhaniyim, right? This level where he is connected with the divine and the angels. וידע האמיתות בלימוד. He said beforehand he was in the level of emet v'sheker, knowing truth from false. It says וידע האמיתות בלימוד, אבל במחשבה קלה. Says, and he knew all the truths, everything that was real. He knew it without needing to learn it. Just a slight, let me think about it. Oh, yeah, it's true. So then, what's the meaning of man eating achal me'es hadat, eating from the tree of knowledge? It sounds like, he ate, he would have consumed this knowledge. So how do we explain man eating from the tree of knowledge? Well, one of the objectives of Maimonides' book, Guide for the Perplexed, is to teach you, it's like a dictionary. Maimonides says many, languages have similar words or words that sound similar but have opposite meanings between different languages. For instance, the word he. What does he mean in English? He is like him, right? What does he mean in Hebrew? It means she. That's like the opposite. It sounds exactly the same, but it's the opposite. This is one of the objectives of the Guide for the Perplexed. It's like, I want to present you with a dictionary. A Hebrew, not a Hebrew English dictionary, a Hebrew prophetic dictionary. All these words in Hebrew that are brought in scripture that have other meanings to them. So what does the word achal mean? He says, well, first definition of the word achal, המשמעות הראשונה שנקבעה למילה זו בלשון, right, in the Hebrew language, היא נטילת המזון שבעלי חיים נוטלים. Right, it's to consume the food that all animals consume. It's called achal, he ate. לכך אין צריך דוגמה. He says, for this, I don't need to bring any example. אחרי כן, right, later on, הבחינה הלשון בהכינה שתי משמעויות. Right, the word achal evolved into two different meanings. המשמעות האחת, one of the meanings, כליון הדבר הנאכל ואובדנו. So it's the consuming and destruction of the thing that is being eaten or consumed. כלומר, ישחט צורתו תחילה. Right, for instance, when Moshe has the prophetic vision at the burning bush, he sees a bush burning. He says, "V'haseneh eneno ukal." He says, and the bush isn't being consumed. So that's where we see the word achal being used as consuming something or destroying something, or specifically not destroying something. המשמעות השנייה, and the other meaning for the word achal, היא צמיחתו של בעל חיים על ידי המזון שהוא נוטל. Right? The other meaning of the word achal is actually, it's contrary to the consuming, is when it's being nourished by whatever it is that you're eating. התמדת קיומו באמצעותו, something that gives you sustenance. מציאותו הנמשכת וכושר כוחות הגוף כולם באמצעותו, right, gives sustenance to your body, right? So there's two other, the word achal, eating, that's the simple understanding, but then it has two other meanings to it. One is the destruction of something, and the other is the sustenance of something, of the one doing the eating. All right, so al pi hamashmaut harishona, in accordance to this first out of the two meanings, הושאל לשון אכילה לכל כליון לכל השמדה. It says, so the word achal was borrowed to mean any kind of destruction. ובכלל לכל פשיטת צורה, or any changing of form, from one form to another. right? And the land of your enemies will devour you. Eres ochelet yosheveh, land that devours those who are on it. Herev teukelu, so you'll be devoured by the sword. Tochal herev, right? Eat sword. What does it mean, eat sword? It means be devoured by the sword, be destroyed by the sword. V'tivar bam esh Hashem v'tochal b'kseh ha'machaneh, right? And the fire of God burnt within them, and it destroyed at the edges, all the way to the edges of the camp. Right? All these are using the word achal. Esh ochelahi, right? It's a devouring fire. Lomar mashmid et mamrim et piv, right? A fire that destroys those who go against God's command. Same way that the fire devours anything that it gets hold of. All right, so based on this first understanding of the word achal, we can understand what does it mean to eat achal me'es hadat, eating from the tree of knowledge. So what changed in man's state? It says he was in a perfect state, perfect intellect, and as a result of defying God's command, so he destroyed this da'at that he already had perfect, that he was created with perfectly. And now we can understand why God puts guards in front of the tree of life, says, Ve'ata pen yishlach yado. He says, and now, we're worried that man is going to send forth his hand, Ve'lakach gam etz ha'chaim, and he will also take from the tree of life, Ve'achal, and he's going to destroy it. He already destroyed the tree of knowledge. We're worried that he's going to destroy the tree of life as well. All right, so we saw man's intellect was perfect beforehand. And now he ate from the tree of knowledge, meaning he destroyed the Etz Hadat. And so now what happened? It says he went down to a level where he's preoccupied with social norms, right and wrong, and not what's real and what's good, what's real and what's true, as to what's fiction and false. So what is that? Anybody remember? What is that? It says, De'ot harbe shtekol echad ve'echad b'bnei adam. Right? When Maimonides brings the word dat, what's he talking about? He says, man has many different de'ot. Right? וזו רחוקה מזו, שונה ומשונה מזו, רחוקה ממנו ביותר. Right? יש אדם שהוא בעל חימה כועס תמיד. Right? There's one person who is always very, very angry. Another person who's very settled in his mind and he doesn't get angry. אם יכעס כעס מעט בכמה שנים. Once in a blue moon, he'll get angry. ויש אדם שהוא גבע לב ביותר. And there's someone who is arrogant. ויש שהוא שפל רוח ביותר. Right? You already know all these sources. We repeated them a few times. So what is the dot? What are these deot?
Oh, good. Midot?
Midot, the midot of man. We said when man was created, he was a prophet. Remember back to our class on prophecy, the prerequisite to being a prophet is you have to have perfect midot. And now when man sinned, he destroyed his midot. He is no longer worthy. And therefore, you say, well, man has the freedom of choice. Right? Because beforehand, he was living in a state of true and false. And now he destroyed his midot, he corrupted his midot, right? And he can choose, he can decide for himself what's right and what's wrong. Right and wrong for man is no longer dependent on God's instruction. Yodehu me'asmo, right? Reshut lechol adam netuna lo. Every person has the sovereignty, the ability to decide if he wants to go the righteous way, and to become righteous, right? He has the right to do so. And if he wants to lean towards the ways of the wicked and become an evil person, he has that ability to do it. This is what it says in Torah. Hen ha'adam haya ke'ahad mimenu lada'at tov vara. It says, behold, man has become ehad, one, unique, that from himself he decides and he chooses what is good and what is wrong. This species of man is now unique in the world. There is no other animal, there's no other creature who can do this, that from his own intellect, from his own mind, from his own thought, he knows what's right and wrong, or he decides what's right and wrong. Or society, based on social norms, they decide what's right for them and what's wrong for them. ועושה כל מה שהוא חפץ, and he does whatever he wants. ואין מי שיעכב בידו מלעשות הטוב או הרע. And there's no one holding men back, inhibiting from doing right or wrong. כיוון שכן הוא, and because of that, right, there's a risk. פן ישלח ידו, he might send forth his hand. ולקח גם מעץ החיים, and take also from the tree of life, ואכל וחי לעולם. And devour, destroy, ואכל וחי לעולם, and live forever. Well, how does that work? Any ideas? We'll get to that later. Seems to be contradictory. V'achal, destroy. V'chai na'olam, and to live forever. He's destroying the tree of life. How do you live forever? By destroying life. Well, we'll see. So once man corrupted his midot, there's now danger that he will also corrupt the tree of life. And so God, pay attention, he still never forbid man from eating from the tree of life. He just put safeguard, guarding the way to the tree of life. And what did he put? Vayashken mikedem legan eden et hakiruvim, right? On the entrance, at the entrance to Gan Eden, or to the east of Gan Eden, he put there the kiruvim, a level of malachim. Ve'et lahat hacherem hamitapechet, and also the flaming sword, the flaming, shifting, overturning sword. Lishmor et derech etz hachaim, to protect the path or the way to or of the tree of life. Now, how I, growing up, always understood this as there's this big, or maybe two big keruvim, right? It's in plural. And they're holding this sword, this flaming sword, right? It says, "Vayashken mikeden Gan Eden et hakiruvim," and he put the keruvim before. It didn't say "La tacherev hamitapechet," right? Is the weapon of the keruvim, which is how I always imagined it growing up. It says he put two things there. He put the keruvim and he put this sword. So what is this sword? What is the lahat hacherev hamitapechet? It says hamalachim, the angels, the malachim, gam ken inam ba'alei gufim. So the angels, we said, they're pure abstract intellect, no physical form. Elahim sechanim nivdalim min homer, right? They have no physical form. They are just pure intellect, kmo sheitbarer, to be abstract ideas. Him pe'olim v'ha'el bera'am. Right? God created them, and they function in accordance to God's will. כפי שיובהר, בבראשית רבה אמירו, right? In one of the Tanaic books on Midrashim, it's called Bereshit Rabbah. It says, Lahat hacherev hamitapechet, al Shem misharetav esh lohet. It says, how do they explain Lahat hacherev hamitapechet? They said, Lahat refers to misharetav esh lohet. Misharetav, his servants, are a blazing fire. Meaning, the malachim. Hamitapechet, why is it called mitapechet? Mitapechet means shifting or changing. Shehem mitapchim. This is because they're always shifting. Pe'amim anashim, pe'amim nashim. Sometimes they're man, sometimes they're woman. Or they appear as men, Sometimes they appear as women. פעמים רוחות. Sometimes they're strong winds. פעמים מלאכים. Sometimes they appear as angels. באמרה זאת אמרו במפורש שאין הם בעלי חומר ואין להם תבנית. גשמית כבואה מחוץ לדעת. Here, the Chachamim statement or explanation of להט החרב המתהפכת, they explicitly say that the malachim have no physical form, only as they're perceived by man in his intellect. אלא כל זאת במראה הנבואה. All this, whether they appear as men or as women, right? This is all in accordance to the vision of the prophet, whatever the prophet sees in his vision. ובהתאם לפעולת הכוח המדמה, and in accordance to the function of man's imagination. כפי שיצוין משמעות אמיתת הנבואה, as we will explain when we discuss prophecy later on. This is towards the end of the first section of the Moreh, right? The second half of the second section of the Moreh is when he really goes into prophecy in a lot more detail, which we have already studied parts of. So according to this statement of the Chachamim in Midrash Rabbah, it says, Lahat HaCherev HaMitapechet hints to, alludes to the malachim that the Nevi'im see when they prophesize. Lahat, the word lahat, comes from the word mishareta v'shlohet. Says the full pasuk in Tehillim is oseh malachav v'ruchot, right? He makes his malachim the winds, mishareta v'eshlohet, right? His servants are blazing fire. So lahat hacherev hamitapechet is hinting to misharetav eshlohet. His servants are blazing fire, and that's talking about the malachim. And hamitapechet alludes to man's imaginatory faculty and how he perceives the malachim, because they keep changing shapes because they have no actual shape. And this lahat hacherev hamitapechet is that level of malachim who speak to the Nevi'im. Da she'amitat ha-nevuah u'mahuta. Right, this is also a source that we've brought, almost all the sources we've brought throughout this past semester. It says, know that the essence of nevuah is shefa hashofea min ha'el yit'aleh v'yithalel, right, is this shefa, this overflow coming from God, be'emtzaut ha'sechel ha'po'el, right? This comes through something which the philosophers refer to as the active intellect. So comes through this thing called the intellect, and it overflows. Right? It overflows into man's own intellect. And from there, when that overflows onto man's imagination. This is the highest level that man can reach. Right? And this is the absolute perfection that is available to the species of man. Like, it would be like saying a cheetah could run, between this many kilometers an hour to this many kilometers. The top rate of a cheetah is this. You can't get any faster than that. The highest level of humanity is reaching this level where the Sechel HaPoel is overflowing into your own intellect, which is overflowing into your imagination, and you are prophesizing. You are speaking to God. All right? And this koach hamidameh is one of the functions of the nefesh. Right? V'cherek hamidameh, right? The imaginatory faculty, which is part of the nefesh. והוא הכוח אשר יזכור לשמי המוחשים אחר העלמם, right? And this is the function of man's nefesh, which remembers things that man saw when they're no longer in front of him, right? Man's memory. מקרבת החושים אשר השיגום, וירכיב קצתם, ויפריד קצתם מקצתם, right? So it sees different things and it puts them together in his imagination. And it also separates things in his imagination. וזה ירכיב הכוח הזה מן העניינים אשר השיגום, עניינים שלא ישיגם כלל, right? And therefore this imagination of man could put things together in a way that it's impossible that these things will exist. כמו שידמה אדם ספינת ברזל פשוט באוויר. Same way a man can imagine the Titanic flying in the skies. It's impossible. But in man's imagination, it's possible. This is all part of man's imaginatory faculty. And this is part once you perfect your imagination, right? That's part of the criteria to becoming a Navi. We say Nevi'im, and this is where the Nevi'im receive their Nevuah from. Ma'alot, and they have many different levels of Nevuah. כמו שיש בחוכמה, חכם גדול מחברו, right? Same way in wisdom, you have one person who's wiser than the other. So too, Navi gadol minavi. You have a prophet who is a greater prophet than another prophet. וכולן, but all of them, אין רואים מראה הנבואה אלא בחלון בחזיון לילה. They all see their prophecy in a dream at night. Or ביום אחר שתיפול עליהם תרדמה, or during the day once they go into a coma or a deep sleep. כמו שנאמר, as it says, במראה אליו אתוודע, בחלום אדבר בו. When I shall reveal myself to him in a vision, I speak to him in a dream. וכולן, and all the prophets, כשמתנבאים אבראהן מזדעזעים, right? When they receive prophecy, right? They tremble. וכוח הגוף כושל, and their bodies are, they're mushbat, they can't function. ועשתונותיהם מתטרפות, ותישאר הדעה פנויה להבין מה שתראה. His intellect stays free of his physical form to understand what it sees in the vision. כמו שנאמר באברהם, as it says regarding Abraham, והנה אימה חשיכה גדולה נופלת עליו. Right? This great, terrible, this trembling comes upon Abraham. This fear, this horrible fear came upon Abraham when he received prophecy. The things that are revealed to a Navi in his vision, derech mashal modi'inno. They are all communicated to the Navi with an allegory. ומיד יחקק בליבו פתרון המשל במראה הנבואה. And as he sees this allegory, right away he knows the meaning of this vision that he's seeing. וידע מהו, he knows what it is. כמו הסולם שראה יעקב אבינו. An example is Yaakov Avinu. When he was running away, he received a prophetic vision. He saw this ladder going up to the heavens. Yaakov knew the meaning of this vision that he saw. All of the Nevi'im, when they prophesize, and they can't prophesize whenever they want. They need to focus their minds. They need to seclude themselves, go off on their own. They need to sit down, focus their minds, and they need to enter a happy state. Right? Nevuah doesn't come on a person, no mitoch asvut, not through sadness, ולא מתוך עצלות, not through some sort of depression or laziness, אלא מתוך שמחה. But only when a person is in a happy state. So all these criteria, all these, call it ma'afinim, all these attributes of nivuah, of all the nevi'im, we can see that they all stem from one thing. They're already symptoms of one thing, and that's their nevuah comes from their imagination, or it's a function of their imagination. B'halom b'chazyon layla, right? That they only receive their nevuah in a prophetic dream, because the dream is the ultimate function of the imagination. That's when it functions at its most. They go into this terrible fear. It's an emotion. That's part of their imagination. Mashal, they see an allegory. It's all part of imagination. They can't prophesize whenever they want. Right? It depends on their emotional state. They have to be at their utmost emotional state, happy, simha. So that's why they can't prophesy whenever they want. That's all part of man's imagination. But yadata, you already know, כי כל כוח גופני יחלש וידעה ויפסד את ויבריא את אחרת. That any physical function, any physical force man has, sometimes it's stronger, sometimes it's weaker, sometimes it's healthy, sometimes it's sick. וזה הכוח המדמה, and this imaginatory faculty that man has, כוח הגופני בלא ספק. This is definitely another one of man's physical forces. It's part of his nefesh. ולזה תמצא הנביאים תתבטל נבואתם בעת האבן או בעת הכעס וכיוצא בהם. And that's why you see that the prophets, they will not have prophecy when they are in mourning, deep mourning, or when they are mad. כבר ידעת אמרתם, you already know the saying, the statement of the Chachamim, אין הנבואה שורה לא מתוך עצבות, that nevuah doesn't come to a person when he is sad or when he is depressed. ושיעקב אבינו לא בעטו נבואה כל ימי אבלו. And Yaakov Avinu did not have any prophecy from God for 17 years, the whole time that he was mourning the loss of Yosef. And we see that when he hears that Yosef is alive and in Egypt, says Vatehi Ruach Yaakov Avihem, right? And the spirit of their father Yaakov came back to life. And that's what Hachamim say the first time Nevuah came to Yaakov after he heard of Yosef, or after he thought that Yosef passed away. So because the imaginatory faculty is the physical force of man, and sometimes it is healthy, sometimes it is strong, sometimes it's weak or sick, then man's nevuah, doesn't come to him all the time, most of the nevi'im. Only when he is at his utmost perfection. So we saw that lahat hacherev hamitapechet, right? This sword, this flaming, shifting sword of man, is actually talking about that level of malachim that speak to the nevi'im through man's imaginatory faculties, imagination. And so therefore, man's prophecy has all the limitations of man's imagination. However, as opposed to lahat acherev hamitapechet, there's another level. There's the keruvim. There's a higher level of prophecy. What's that higher level of prophecy? There was one prophet that didn't have any of these limitations of all the other prophets. It says, Kol devarim she'amarnu, everything we said previously about the limitations on nevuah for all of the nevi'im, and derech ha-nevuah lechol ha-nevi'im harishonim v'haronim, right? This is the way of nevuah for all of the prophets, the earlier ones and the later ones, every single one, hos Moshe. Everybody except for Moshe, Moses. Rabbeinu v'Rabban shel kol ha-nevi'im. Says our master and the master of all the prophets. Uma hefresh yesh benevvat Moshe nishar kol ha-nevi'im. Right, and what is the difference between the nevuah of Moshe and that of all the other prophets? Shekol ha-nevi'im b'halom u'b'mareh. All the prophets receive the prophecy through a vision. Moshe Rabbeinu hu eir ve'omed. And Moshe Rabbeinu is not, he doesn't need to go into a deep state, he doesn't need to go to sleep. He could receive his prophecy, he's awake and standing. Eir ve'omed. Shne'emar, as it says, Ubebo Moshe in Ohel Moed, and as Moshe comes to Ohel Moed, ledaber ito, right, to speak to him, to speak to God, vayishma et hakol, he hears the noise, the sound of God, the voice of God. Kol ha-nevi'im al yedei malach, all the nevi'im, when they prophesy, it's only through a malach, an angel / intermediary. לפיכך רואים מה שרואים במשל וחידה. Therefore, when they receive their prophecy, they receive it in an allegory, as a riddle. ומשה רבנו לא על ידי מלאך. And Moshe Rabbeinu does not receive his prophecy through a malach or an intermediary. שנאמר, as it says, פה אל פה אדבר בו. I shall speak to Moshe face to face, mouth to mouth. ונאמר, it says, ודיבר אדוני אל משה פנים אל פנים. It says, and God spoke to man face to face, to Moshe face to face. ונאמר, and it says, ותמונת אדוני יביט. Right, and also says that Moshe can see the image of God. כלומר, שאין שם משל, meaning he doesn't need a riddle to understand the message that God is trying to, or is conveying to Moshe. He sees it as it is. אלא רואה הדבר על בוריו, he sees it as it is, the message, בלא חידה, בלא משל. Without any riddles, without any allegories. כל הנביאים יראים ונבהלים ומתמוגגים. All the prophets, they get completely scared out. ומשה רבנו אינו כן, Moshe does not get scared. הוא שהכתוב אומר, this is what the Torah says, כאשר ידבר איש אל רעהו, right, same way that a person speaks to his colleague, to his friend, right, כמו שאין אדם לבד לשמוע דברי חברו, ככה היה כוח בדעתו של רבנו להבין דברי הנבואה. והוא עומד על עומדו שלם. So to Moshe, as a person speaks to his colleague and is not afraid to hear what he says, he doesn't tremble from him. So to Moshe does not tremble when he receives prophecy. He has enough strength, intellectual strength, to receive the prophecy without going into this terrible, trembling state. Kol hanevim, all the prophets, en mitnabim b'chol et she'yirtzu, they don't prophesy whenever they want. ומשה רבנו, and Moshe, אינו כן, אלא כל זמן שיחפוץ. Moshe Rabbeinu, he can receive his prophecy whenever he wants. Whenever he wants, רוח הקודש לו בשתו, ונבואה שורה עליו. Right? Whenever he wants, רוח הקודש comes onto him, and he receives prophecy. ואינו צריך לכוון דעתו ולהזדמן לה. He doesn't need to focus his mind actively and prepare himself for nevuah, שהרי הוא מכוון ומזומן, right? Because he is always focused and ready, ועומד and stable and standing, כמלאכי השרת, like the malachim themselves. Therefore, he can prophesy whenever he wants. As it says, imdu ve'eshme'a. He says, wait a minute, and I will listen. What God commands to you. Come to Moshe with a question. Unlike Bil'am, who says, stay the night and I'll get back to you in the morning. Right? Moshe says to them, wait a minute, I'm going to go into Ohel Moed, ask God, and I'll tell you what he says. All
Can I
right?
ask you a question, Sami?
Yes.
So you were talking about the different intellects in the beginning. I just want to tie this into what you're talking about right now, and if I understood you correctly. So the intellect that we had in the Gan Eden, where it was either true or false, but then Adam ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, so that was a different type of intellect. You knew what
Right.
was good and evil, but before it was true or false. Is the intellect of a Navi, a prophet, is that the more into the intellect of true and false, or is it still in the intellect of good and evil?
All right, so we're jumping a little bit ahead, right? Because we said basically man's state, his perfect state, before eating from the tree of knowledge, right, was that he knew everything. So the highest way, the highest level of knowing God, because you can't know God directly, is knowing everything there is to know about the world and how God leads the world. Right? That was the state of man by default when he was created. But then man started to have cravings and he kind of like veered away from his intellect and he corrupted his da'at. Corrupting his da'at, we said that's corrupting his midot. And now he's no longer at that state where he knows everything. He's no longer at the state where he can communicate with God. Now, man's objective is to get back to Gan Eden. Right? What's the path to get back to Gan Eden? That's something we'll discuss, I guess, probably next week. However, the path to Gan Eden has certain obstacles. God placed two obstacles there, the Keruvim and the Lahat HaCherev HaMitapechet. The Lahat HaCherev HaMitapechet we saw is the obstacle where you have to, in order to pass the obstacle of Lahat HaCherev HaMitapechet, you need to reach human perfection. You need to reach this level of the Malachim that man reaches when he is a Navi. And beyond that, there's the Keruvim. And what's the Keruvim? Well, the Keruvim is that state of Nevuah that is the next level. Because Moshe received his Nevuah from the Keruvim. We see he surpassed that level of Lahat HaCherev HaMitapechet. Because Lahat HaCherev HaMitapechet are all the limitations that all the Nevi'im have, except for Moshe. Just, I'm going to thank you for that question because it gives me a good summary of what we were learning today and where we can pick up from next week.
I thank you for the answer because it connected everything for me. Thank you so much.
All right, so wait till next week. We'll connect everything back all the way to the beginning. All right, so Ekronenu, right? Our concept here is what we're trying to say. Shekol Navi shomet hadiburak be'emtzaut malach. All the Nevi'im, they receive their nevuah through an intermediary, the malach, except for Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu does not receive his nevuah through a malach. Look what he says here. He says all the Nevi'im through a malach, right? Lefichach. Therefore, they see everything they see in a mashal and chida. They receive their prophecy in the form of a riddle or an allegory. What does that mean? Because they receive their prophecy from a malach, therefore they receive it in the form of an allegory and a riddle. So that therefore is that this intermediary, this malach, is man's imaginatory faculty. That is the malach. So malach are physical forces. The wind is a malach. The forces of man's nefesh are malachim. Man's imagination is a malach. And that malach is also known as the Ishim, is also known as Lahat HaCherev HaMitapechet, the flaming, shifting sword. So every Navi hears the voice of God, God's instruction, his nevuah, only through a malach, except for Moshe Rabbeinu, which for Moshe it says pe adaber bo. I speak to Moshe mouth to mouth, face to face. Da efo she'inyan hu kazeh. Understand this. V'sheha'imtzai kan, right? This intermediary, this malach, hu hakoach hamedameh. That is man's imagination. כי רק בחלום של נבואה הוא שומע את האל מדבר אליו. Because you only hear God's voice in a vision, in a dream. Meaning that's the imagination. ומשה רבנו, however, Moshe, he receives נבואה מעל הכפורת מבין שני הקירובים. Moshe Rabbeinu receives his nevuah directly from the keruvim without without the function of man's imagination. So it comes down from the active intellect, overflows into man's intellect. That's the keruvim. From there it overflows into man's imagination. That's where all the Nevi'im receive their nevuah. Moshe receives it, he already surpassed it. He gets it right away at the level of the keruvim. We already explained in the Mishneh Torah all the differentiations between the nevuah of Moshe and the nevuah of the Nevi'im. Those are the sources that we read previously. And we explained the meaning of face to face, from mouth to mouth. And as a man speaks to his friend or his colleague, says, understand this. From there, what we already brought in the Mishneh Torah, and there's no need to repeat what we already brought in the Mishneh Torah, the sources that we just read previously. All right, so the imagination of man is the malach, or the intermediary between man or all the Nevi'im and their nevuah, as opposed to Moshe Rabbeinu, who receives his nevuah directly from the intellect, without the imagination. All right, I think we're going to finish with this source for today. All right, Hachamim, they say explicitly, to those who are intelligent and understand what they're saying, Shekol koach min hakochot hagufanim hu malach. Says all of the physical forces are malachim. Kol sheken hakochot hamefuzarim ba'olam. And so all the more so to all the forces spread out in the world, meaning all the forces of nature. V'shekol koach yesh lo pe'ula mesuyemet achat miyuchedet. And every force has its own specific function. Ve'enu shete pe'ulot. Said Bereshit Rabbah, going back to this, one of the oldest Tanaic or Midrashic literature. It says Taneh, right? This is what the Hachamim learned, taught. En malach echad ose sheteh shlichuyot. But you don't have one malach doing two different, being sent on two different missions. Ven shnei malachim osin shlichut achat. You don't have two different malachim going out to do the same mission. Every malach has its own function, has its mission. זה עניינם של כל הכוחות, and this is correct for all forces of nature. כך מוצא אתה את החכמים אומרים תמיד מלאך שהוא ממונה על כך וכך. And therefore you see the חכמים, they say things like, this is a malach that is in charge of this thing. For instance, Raphael, he is in charge of healing. Right? In the vision that Avraham Avinu had, he saw three malachim. Three malachim came to him. And afterwards, when the malachim left and went to Sodom, there were only two malachim. What happened to the third? He says, well, that third one was Raphael. He came to heal Avraham. That's it. His job is done. He doesn't go on to Sodom. Two malachim went on to Sodom, meaning there were two things that went on in Sodom that required two malachim. מכיוון שכל כוח שמינה אותו האל על דבר מה, הוא המלאך הממונה על אותו דבר. ולשון מדרש קהלת, this is also one of the older midrashei חכמים, מדרש קהלת says, on the book of Ecclesiastes, בשעה שאדם ישן, at a time when man is asleep, נפשו אומרת למלאך, right, his nefesh, his soul, is speaking to the malach, umalach lakeruv, and the malach speaks to the keruv. הרי שהם אמרו מפורשות למי שמבין ומשכיל. Says they said this explicitly to those who, have the understanding, that the ability to understand what the Hachamim are hinting to. What does that mean? His nefesh speaks to the malach, and the malach speaks to the keruv. Says שהכוח המדמה אף הוא קרוי מלאך. Says this imaginatory faculty of man, right? Because he's sleeping and he's dreaming. That itself is called the malach. ושהשכל, and the man's intellect, keruv, is referred to by Chachamim as the keruv. Says כמה יפה דבר זה למי שיודע. Says how beautiful is a statement to those who can understand it. Says, and how terrible this statement is for the ignorance who can't understand the words of the Hachamim. All right, so all was a summary of this section. All the physical forces in man, in nature, are all called malachim, and therefore the imaginatory faculty of man too is a malach. And the intellect, the sechel, which nevuah comes from the sechel to this imagination, is called the kerub, the caribs, a carib. Moshe Rabbeinu, who received his nevuah without that intermediary state of the imagination, received his nevuah directly from the kerub. This is what the Torah says, miben shnei keruvim, from between the two keruvim. All right, and if you remember back, and we'll continue this next week, right? In the second chapter of Hilchot Yesodei Torah, we said there are 10 levels of hachami of malachim, right? Starts with hayot on the top. They carry the chariot. Then you have the ofanim, which are like the wheels of the chariot, right? You go all the way down to the 9th level is the keruvim. And the level below the keruvim are the ishim. And we said, why are they called ishim? Because that is the level that speaks to man. And when man speaks to God, when he receives prophecy, he is elevated to that level of the ishim. And that level of the ishim is the lahat, is just another way of saying lahat acherev hamitapechet. And above them is the keruvim. the level of Moshe's prophecy. And these are the obstacles on the way to the tree of life and back to the Garden of Eden, which we will discuss more next week. Any questions so far?
Yes, can I ask what is the, do you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, about Elia, the Navi Elia and Elisha, why does Elia has to come before Mashiach comes?
That's a good question. Later on in the course, we'll also talk about the redemption and the days of the Mashiach, or at least what we know or think we know about it. I will discuss that more in depth. In my opinion, the reason why Eliyahu needs to come back before is in order to constitute the Sanhedrin, to reconstitute the Supreme Court of Israel. Eliyahu was the only one who traditionally never passed away, who has semicha from all the way back to Moshe. So he's like the only one who could who can reestablish the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court. That's an opinion. I have no proof for it. Another possibility is that we need, in order to locate the place of the Mizbeach, says we need a Navi. So possibly Eliyahu will come to testify the exact location of the Mizbeach.
Mm.
But we'll study that more later on.
Oh, thank you very much.
Any other questions? All right. I hope you enjoyed this class. It's a topic I really like. It really demands a lot of imagination and creativity to really understand the text, right? We're only dealing with 3 verses. 3 verses in the story of the Garden of Eden, or even like just the banishment from the Garden of Eden and the way back. And this is just the beginning of the imaginatory faculty, right? To get Nevuah, you need to perfect it. You need to study the whole Tanakh this way. And slowly, we'll get there.
Thank you so much. Very, very interesting.
Anything else? Anybody?
Thank you.
Oh, pleasure.
Semi. Sorry.
Yes.
I would like to ask you, what source are you using? Where are you reading from? What book is this?
Okay, this is an article that I wrote. I wrote this about 15 years ago, and it has all sorts of sources in it. Mostly from Maimonides.
Oh,
Maimonides says at the beginning of his book, in order to understand anything in my book, the guide for the perplexed, which in short we always just refer to as Hamore, the guide, right? He says you need to learn to cross-reference every single chapter in this book to every other chapter in this book. So we're jumping from the first chapter to the last chapter to chapters in the middle of the book to really put an idea together in the guide. You need to bring sources from all over the guide.
but mostly you say Maimonides is Rambam.
Right, the Rambam, Maimonides. We also brought some Rabbi Yehuda Halevi over here. Just in 3 sentences, he coins something that Maimonides says throughout the book.
Okay,
I
but
have
this
a
is
question.
different books, right? From Rambam.
Right, so a lot of it
Different.
was from the guide, and some of it was also from the Mishneh Torah, his legal
Ah,
code. And
yes,
even
I
then,
get
it's not all one place, it's throughout. Here, Hilchot De'ot, that's in his second book. Hilchot Yesodei Torah we brought, which is in the first book. Hilchot, we also brought from Hilchot Teshuvah. Oh, we also brought things from his commentary to the Mishnah, right, in the Shemona Perakim.
Uh-huh.
This
Okay.
this is from his commentary to the Mishnah, introduction to Masechet Avot.
Uh-huh. Okay. Okay. Some of them I have in my library. Okay.
That's
I
great.
wanted,
Read them.
okay. Yeah, sure. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. I think Maimonides is great for early stages, learning the fundamentals, and he's especially great for the late stages, the more advanced study.
Mm,
Anything
Can I ask?
else? Anybody else?
I want to
Yes.
ask some. I find somehow what happened throughout Tanakh in the initial stages, things like in my imagination, it's like echoing. So, when we sin and when we break some other commandment, do we also lose access to something else? Some
Right.
access.
So every sin and every transgression we do puts up a barrier between us and God. Now, God has barrier piercing light, right? So not every barrier cuts us off from him. But they make his light less visible, and it's up to us. We can correct that by doing teshuvah, doing more mitzvot, by studying more Torah, or we could put up more barriers and eventually completely cut ourselves off from God. It's reshut kol adam netuna lo. Everyone has the ability to control his connection to God, to come closer to him or to go further away and completely detach himself from him.
Thank you.
Detaching ourselves is leaving Gan Eden. Going back to him is going back to Gan Eden. Any more questions? Okay, I see that's it.
So,
Oh,
and
sorry.
one last question. So would you say that Gan Eden isn't really, it's not really cut off from us in a way that we cannot access it until the Mashiach come? It is actually something that we can access now.
So just like anything at the beginning, especially at the beginning, the opening chapters of the Torah, there's different levels of understanding the text.
Mm.
One level is that really Gan Eden is a physical place, and that Moshe and the Mashiach comes, will all enter Gan Eden. Another way to understand Gan Eden, and they don't contradict, right? It's not either or. But another way to understand Gan Eden is it's a mental state or an intellectual state. And everyone could personally enter Gan Eden, right? For instance, the Hachamim say when a person reaches a high level, he walks in the Pardes, right? The four Chachamim that went into the Pardes, they went into the orchards. What orchards? So, well, that was entering Gan Eden. Well, hopefully by the end of next week's class, when we finish studying this topic, I have a better understanding of Gan Eden, Etz Haim, and how to get back to Gan Eden. Does that answer your question?
Yes,
All right.
and B'ezrat Hashem.
Okay.
we will.
Any more questions? Anybody? Okay, beseder. So it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure seeing you all again. And it was a pleasure to see whoever came last week to the wedding, to see you in person. I'm sorry I didn't really get a chance to stay. I have another class starting in a few minutes. And so I had to leave early last week.
Thank you, Sammy.
It was
All
really
right. So
great.
good night, everybody.
Thank